I'm Yusuf Araman. We're on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum for a very special edition of Strait Talk with expert panelists. Now, joining me just steps away from the action is Austria's former Minister of Defense, Werner Fasslabend, and we also have Suay Acikalin, Associate Professor at Ankara's Haci Bayram University. Thanks for joining me, both of you. I want to begin talking about the war in Ukraine. Antalya Diplomacy Forum, a very special venue because 3 years ago here, then Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov probably had one of the biggest diplomatic breakthroughs when they met here at this forum. Now, when we look at the past 3 years and we look at this moment in time right now, Werner, how close are we to the possibility of peace? Is the worst of the fighting over? Is it behind us?
Yeah, I think it's the best time to make peace because, I mean, if you look back for more than 1.5 years, there was practically no movement at the battlefield. I mean, just an advancement of around about 20 to 30 kilometers from the Russian side, but this is nothing. This is no strategic gain. This is only tactical. And the old rule, you know, a war will be finished if one party, the stronger one, has reached its war goal, or if the two parties realize that they cannot reach their war goals anymore. And I think we are exactly more than 1 year in this situation, and therefore the time has become ripe and mature to make peace.
Mm-hmm. I also want to ask you, the arrival of Donald Trump, how are the Europeans viewing that vis-a-vis war in Ukraine?
Yeah, of course, nobody expected the way Donald Trump would handle this case or the way he would act anyhow, you know. This suddenly was not a surprise from the fact that he promised, you know, to make peace and that he would try to have a good and close relationship with Russia. Insofar a change to the Biden administration, but nobody expected this extreme reversal of American politics.
Suay, when we look at the past 3 years, the Turks have played a big role, whether it's the Grain Corridor deal, the meeting between Kuleba and Lavrov, as I stated here at Antalya Diplomacy Forum, prisoner swaps. They've had a very important role in the diplomatic breakthroughs that we've seen. Does Turkey still have a role to play, or is it the Donald Trump show from now on?
Well, we saw that last 3 years a different, basically Turkey's contribution to the possible peacemaking process. And actually, I do believe that Turkey still has that position because, okay, Donald Trump can also speak with the President Putin after the 3 years later on as an American president. But Turkey, first of all, geopolitically and geographically, the most closest country who can contribute to the peacemaking process, including providing the security guarantees during the grain deal agreement. And the second one, I really give importance to the Turkey's and the President Erdogan leader-to-leader diplomacy. Personally, he has a very strong relationship with the President Putin as well as the President Zelensky. And both sides actually has a high level of confidence towards the President himself and also Turkey's last contribution during these agreements. And the last one, if you ask me, the point is that, yes, we are talking about the peace, but which peace? Because if obviously that Americans' peace plan right now is a little bit complicated than we are thinking about, and if possible peace plans comes out from the American perspective seems to be comes for the another problem for the European continent. And it's obvious that Turkey giving the more importance towards the more justice peace in this respect and focusing on the soil integrity of the Ukraine as well. I never heard of the soil integrity of the Ukraine from the other sides regarding the peace. These all the unique position of the Turkey politically, geopolitically makes still the most important actor during the peace process.
Mm-hmm. There was a press conference last month, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky with Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance. Not the typical press conference. It turned into a Turkish drama almost. Do the Ukrainians still trust Donald Trump? Do they still trust the Americans? Because up till now, the US was probably Ukraine's #1 ally.
Well, the question is hard because some polls shows that first of all, how the Ukrainians have a confidence towards their president Zelensky, and how they see the American President Donald Trump in this case of the Russian-Ukrainian war. If you ask me, it's not only the Ukrainians, but most of the other allies, so-called allies, Americans, seems to be a little bit cracked down on the American allying, and also some confidence related with the security issues, because just after that the press conference, Americans stopped the intelligence sharing and the military support for 1 week, and we clearly see that it could be direct and the very short reactionary results from the Americans makes the Ukrainians a little bit less confident towards America.
Werner, so far the diplomacy that we've seen Trump undertake, it's been US delegations with the Russians, US delegations with the Ukrainians. Is there room at the table for the EU? Does Trump even want any European officials at the table, or does he see the EU as a group of leaders who basically did nothing over the past 3 years for peace and irrelevant at this moment?
Simply said, there will not be very much room for the Europeans, as far as I see it. Russians always made clear that their partner at the other side will be America, and to some extent, of course, Ukraine. And Europe only can play an additional backing role for Ukraine, and maybe play a role in a certain phase at the end when the question will come up about the future security of Ukraine. Then Europe will have a decisive role.
Okay, if Europe is sidelined and Trump does go ahead by himself, or brings on a leader like Erdogan or Orban or the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, what is a post-war EU or European-Russia relationship going to look like? How is that going to be rebuilt to an area that's sustainable, at least, or manageable tension?
Yeah, I think nobody knows at the moment, because everybody still is thinking in how to end this conflict. But certainly this will be the most important role, and what I try to tell people is we have to prepare, because Russia is Europe's biggest neighbor. And this is important not only for security, but also for economy. It's the biggest neighboring market, and neighborhood is a very important factor for the development of the economy. And the same vice versa. Therefore, both sides will have to find a new way to treat each other, to handle each other, and to normalize their relationship. I guess it will last some time, but it will work out.
Suay, now in any peace deal, obviously Ukraine's going to want security guarantees. A two-part question. Is NATO in Ukraine's future, and will Turkey be part of a security guarantee?
Starting with your first question regarding the future of the Ukraine in NATO, it's a big question mark if you ask me. Although there will be a peace in soon, I'm not expecting to see the Ukraine as a part of the NATO. And the point is that how peace will be realized, because if there will be no integrity of the Ukraine anymore, and some part will be in the Russian soil, it's also make much more harder to talk about the Ukrainian membership in the NATO. Secondly, regarding the Turkey's security guarantee, the point is that actually, both on the paper and the reality, Turkey is actually guaranteeing the security in the Black Sea region right now through the grain deal agreement. Most of the people commented that as a food security agreement, but also at the same time, it's a Black Sea security agreement. And I think there will be always possibility to restore this agreement in a much more maybe upgraded version as a security manner way. And maybe we can say that these security guaranteeing that they are expecting from the European side is also a little bit mixed signals right now we have been receiving from the Europe side, because they have been talking about the Turkey's position as a guaranteeing the military stuff, but at the same time they are trying to exclude the Turkey in the both security foreign issues and a new architecture of the Europe as well.
Werner, a similar question to you. Is NATO in Ukraine's future, and will European countries take part in any type of peacekeeping efforts or security guarantees if a peace deal is reached?
I mean, I do not see a NATO membership of Ukraine in a foreseeable time. This seems to be a fact because unanimity would be needed in order to get such a decision, and I cannot see that. But certainly the European countries will have to play a role. I mean, there is only one country that can provide a security guarantee for Ukraine. This is Ukraine itself. This is their strength and their will to defend their independence. But of course they will need, especially material from European countries, but also know-how. And in the long run, I guess there will be a very close relationship between NATO and Ukraine without Ukraine having become a member.
Okay. So the consensus between both of you is no NATO membership for Ukraine in the future. Possibility of maybe Turkey taking part in a security guarantee, maybe Europeans taking part in a security guarantee. That's vague and remains to be seen, but it looks like the US won't be part of a security guarantee with American boots on the ground. So when we look at NATO, the future of NATO, and one of the biggest challenges, which is Russia, and one of the most real challenges right now, Ukraine, unfolding and possibly ending, and you have America sidelined, you have no NATO for the future of Ukraine, you have the non-American, non-North American NATO basically moving forward. Suay, does this mean that a European army is going to be talked about more realistically going forward?
Well, Yusuf, I do believe that in the metaphorical level, it could be, but in the reality, unfortunately, even in the last 3 months, that especially after the diplomatic scandal between the Zelensky and Trump, Europe first seems to be a very reactionary position, and they're directly focusing on the talking about the European army. But the European army conception has a long history, and unfortunately it has never been realized. And if you look over the facts, I think Fasslabend knows better than me, but the numbers, capability of the European countries, individual military capability is a big problem for the composing of the European army. And the problem is that how the system will be administrated and how the system will be funding by the European members, because there is already lots of cracks and some problems between the members, even in the when it comes to the NATO. So I think it's still a kind of the good idea, but the point is that who realize, who will funding, and how people are much more willing to have the European army in some sense makes a big challenges towards the European army concept.
Werner, you're a former defense minister. You know your country's military capabilities well. I'm sure you know your European counterparts' military capabilities very well too. Does Europe have enough firepower to keep the Russians at bay in the future? Or if there's peace, is this just a break or a breather for Russia before it resumes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line?
I think this will not only be a short break, because also Russia is exhausted and of course suffers from the economic side, not only from the military side. Europe certainly has to build up its capabilities, and what I see for the first time, it seems to be willing to do that. And because we spoke about the importance of forums and the international conference like the Antalya Diplomacy Conference, for the Europeans, the Munich Security Conference has become a turning point in their awareness that it is absolutely necessary to build up some independent capability in Europe in order to be able, whatever will happen in Russia or also in Washington, to be ready to fight if there comes any danger for a European country.
There's also, it seems to be a fracture in security understanding, security perception or threat perception between the Baltic states, between Western Europe, obviously countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova. They face a much bigger threat. They're more concerned. versus countries like Portugal and Spain where the Russian threat is almost non-existent. How is that going to play out in the future, and especially regarding military spending, because it looks like the EU wants to increase its military spending. There's a lot of pledges going forward. Is everyone going to be on board with forking over more money, especially with the economy and inflation the way it is right now?
Of course, the awareness is quite different, as you said, between the Baltic countries and the Iberian Peninsula, for example. But this is very natural. What I think that will be necessary, not EU as such probably, will be able to do big steps, but it will be a forum of willing states between Germany, France, and Poland, the so-called Weimar Triangle, in its heart and in its core, and surrounded by a few others. Sometimes Britain, even if it is not a member of EU, but especially the Nordic and the Baltic countries and the Eastern countries that used to be under Soviet rule. And therefore, I think it will not be fixed systemically so clear as some people would think, but there will be an activity that will be quite strong. I'm sure about that.
Suay, Erdogan's been on quite a EU kick lately. I mean, he's talking about membership again. He's saying that the EU has no future without Turkey. So he's sending a lot of messaging to Brussels. Now, in the event accession talks are started again, is that what really Erdogan wants? Because I mean, when I look at his presidency and his prime ministership over the last 20 some odd years, he's really built up Turkey's strategic autonomy. I mean, after the US, China, and Russia, I think we can easily say Turkey is probably the fourth most strategically autonomous country in the world. Now, when you look at the EU does exercise a lot of strategic control over many aspects of its member states' political lives and its decision making. Is that what Erdogan really wants, or is he more interested in the European army or the security-centric relationship?
Well, Yusuf, you also heard that yesterday in the opening speech in the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. He clearly says that we want to take our seats in the European Union as a member in soon. I think generally in last 60 years since the membership process started, we send a clear signal to the European Union. But the point is that you ask a very great question. I can say that maybe compared to the 20 years ago, right now President Erdogan and the Turkey sees that being a membership of the European Union is a governmental policy of the Turkey. But at the same time, we are not looking as the direction of our foreign policy, but it's one of our dimension of the foreign policy. It's a big changing, and I think it's a big kind of the different mentality that we thought that. And if you look over the members of the European Union, we just have been talked about that everyone has its own different perception regarding the security issues, and maybe the President Erdogan thinks that why not? I mean, we can be the member of the European Union, we can contribute to European security naturally, but at the same time we can have our own foreign policy choices to keeping this autonomy as much as possible. And I think good point that unfortunately sometimes Brussels doesn't understand that this autonomy is not against the European. If the Europeans can give the strategic blindness towards the Turkey through the anti-Erdogan perception, they can see that Turkey has that kind of the multidimensional foreign policy in a very broad regions, can also contribute the position of European Union in the global scale in a much more positive way. And I think we see in this way, not to think directly the EU membership is the only the soil direction of the foreign policy, but one of the dimension of the foreign policy.
The Turkish defense industry, most specifically the drone maker Baykar, recently acquired Piaggio, an important Italian company, joint venture with Leonardo. We're seeing Turkish defense firms make moves in Europe. Do you think that Turkey could play, at least the defense sector, could play an important role? Because even though Turkey is not at war, production-wise, it's on a wartime footing basically, and it's manufacturing some big numbers and it's ramping up its scale, while many European nations, regarding their manufacturing, they're not at the capacity that they once were. So can Turkey's defense industry play a big role?
I do believe because first one of most of the EU member countries is also the NATO member countries. What I mean is that the main logistic and the system, technical system are same with the Turkey's system together under the NATO umbrella. And secondly, right now Poland, Italy, some other European member countries also started to very closely with the Turkey in the defense sector. Clearly shows that Turkey has that capability, Turkey has that vision for the security and the defense sector as well. So within these all positive dimensions, I think it's a clear position that Turkey can play a much more effective role in the defense sector together with the European countries.
Werner, Turkey, country of population 85 million, about 97, 98% Muslim. If it joined the European Union, probably is going to have the biggest delegation in Brussels. Is Europe ready to let in a country who's going to have the biggest delegation, Muslim majority, possibly visa liberalization, Schengen zone? I mean, is the thinking ready to accept that many Muslims into the European Union? I mean, when we look at the messaging and up till now, the Turks' view towards the EU has kind of been, well, that's a Christian club. Is it a Christian club, or is it ready to say, you know what, we're ready to take on a country as big and as diverse as Turkey as a member state?
Religion doesn't play a very big role anymore in most of European countries. And insofar, the religious perspective will not be decisive. Rather, cultural or other perspectives could be more important. But if we just look at the map, you can see European Union and Turkey do have the same environment. In the northeast, Russia; in the southeast, Middle East with its instability; and in the south or west, it's North Africa. We only will be able to stabilize it together. That's what is my very firm conviction, let me say it in this way. Therefore, what we really would need, I mean, if you look to the actual situation, you have to say that European Union does not influence very much its neighborhood. Turkey does. And this is due not only to your capabilities, but especially to the will to influence it and to the political power that is behind it. And what I see, what would be necessary is to combine it. EU capabilities and Turkish dynamics, this would be certainly something that could develop power.
I want to get a prediction from both of you, a timeline for peace in Ukraine. Do you think it'll happen this year? And do you think the conditions will preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine, or are there going to be concessions? Werner, you first.
Yeah, now, I'm sure that this year should bring an end of the war. Of course, Putin will not follow a timeline that Donald Trump has given him. He will take his own decision and try to also to save his face in such a connection. But I'm pretty sure de facto the war will not go on very much. So far, time has come and we have to prepare the next phase.
Same question to you. Timeline, when can we expect peace, and will the conditions result in a territorial concession by Ukraine?
I agree with Mr. Fasslabend. I'm expecting to see the peace within this year. But the point is that I'm not sure about the sustainability. And for the concession, actually, unfortunately, I couldn't see a very positive future for the integrity of the Ukraine soil, but we will see.
Suay, Werner, thanks for joining me. I'm Yusuf Aram. You've been watching a very special edition of Strait Talk from the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. Take care and goodbye.